Okay, we're recording. Awesome. So welcome everybody to another episode of the Labor Knots podcast. I keep telling myself every time that I start the podcast, I keep telling myself that I'm going to start it a different way. And then as soon as I hit record, I just go into like autopilot. It's not good. I'm going to work on that for everybody. Welcome. It's a ZoomCast, and we are very excited because we are joined by Kim Novak from UFCW 1518. Hi, Kim. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, thanks for the invite. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So Kim, first time on the Labor Knots, although I'm sure it's something that you've just been itching at, of course.
Absolutely.
Because it's the best thing ever. But we really are really excited to have you on. And I think for folks that don't already know who you are, or about the work that your union members do, maybe can you give them a little bit of a description of what kind of work UFCW members do?
Yeah, absolutely. So UFCW 1518 represents about 24,000 members across British Columbia and the Yukon. The majority of our membership is in retail grocery, so working in grocery stores across the province. And we also have a significant number of members in food processing, working at industrial plants. So for example, Rogers Sugar, Catelli, which makes Olivieri products, as well as a lot of the chicken, beef, and pork plants. And we also represent community home support workers and social services. So our union, we like to really focus on the fact that we are empowered by our diversity, the fact that we do represent in multiple sectors with shop stewards and activists who are experts in those fields, are then supported by our union representatives who are experts in understanding the labor code and making sure that we're negotiating strong contracts. We also have recently introduced cannabis into our union, so we unionize the first private dispensary in Canada, which is very exciting. And we also are doing a lot of work representing gig economy workers. We did a big launch last year to fight for Uber and Lyft drivers to be deemed employees rather than independent contractors, because a lot of the work we represent is precarious in nature. And we feel that as these gig economy employers continue to grow and evolve, that we as a union are responsible for representing worker rights before they become a part of our union, so that they're strengthening it for everyone rather than the erosion of work as it exists today.
Yeah, that's, and I know folks, I don't know if you're hearing some feedback on your end, but I'm getting a little bit of feedback. So hopefully that will clear up as we go here, just for folks that are probably, some people are just going to be listening in, so they might not be able to see. The video looks fine for everybody, but hopefully the feedback on the sound gets better. You just described a whole bunch of sectors that are like really critical. Right. I mean,
Yes.
So I think if most people think UFCW 1518, they probably think grocery store workers. I'm assuming that's what most people would think. But like even like a lot of the sectors that you just described that your members work in really are critical. And I think even more so critical considering what kind of times we're in right now. So I think that's firstly really important to acknowledge. And then also that, pre-COVID, I know myself getting to work in the labor movement, I was looking at UFCW really as one of the leaders in organizing in a lot of these gig economies. So kudos to you for kind of taking that on, and kudos to your union for stepping up and trying to organize those workers, or doing a good job organizing those workers. What are we seeing? So is organizing now much more difficult? Like, does that kind of take a back seat to what's going on with the other sector of workers that you have, which are kind of on the front lines? Is that taking a back seat, or how do you do both?
Well, that's a good question. And I think it isn't on the back seat, because I became president last year, the beginning of last year, and Pat Johnson is our secretary treasurer. And the vision that we've had for the organization is to not focus solely on member engagement and steward empowerment or organizing. It's how do you do those things simultaneously? And so now we're in a new world with a different crisis that we're dealing with. Now it's how do you do member engagement, steward empowerment, health and safety co-chair development, because they are critical people at unit level, no matter where your workplace is, that through COVID have the power to really address issues in those workplaces and still continue to represent people who are working in similar sectors that don't have a union today, because they are also very vulnerable workers.
Mm-hmm.
When they don't have a voice speaking for them in this moment, our goal first and foremost is to improve working conditions for non-union workers. And then if they want to join our union, they see value in our organization, then we encourage them to do that. And I think that's been the success of a lot of our organizing campaigns pre-COVID. And we're going to continue to be doing the same work that we are today. We have a new resource center set up for gig economy workers who may be interested in applying for the CERB benefit through financial assistance. It can be complicated doing that. And when you don't have someone to pick up the phone and call, it's a little overwhelming. So we have a staff rep dedicated to that. And simultaneously, we have staff reps that are experts in health and safety that are available 7 days a week to support our members if they have issues on the front lines that need to be addressed, so that they have the knowledge and the support to take issues forward to work safe in the event that they're not being addressed at unit level. So I think the way we do it both is that there's no other way to do it. That is our strategic plan. And now we're just adapting to this new world of COVID.
And so I think you're hitting on something that is probably why you have been so successful, is because you are nimble and willing to kind of be flexible depending on what kind of work folks are doing, and then what kind of sectors they're in, and then obviously what kind of times we're living in, right? And I think, so where does that come from? So your background, we were making fun of each other for being old, but also being young at the same time before we started the podcast. What is your background? Like, how did you get bit by the union bug?
That's so funny. So I actually worked at Safeway for a couple of years while I was going to UBC. And it was, I like to joke that all of this started because I took a wrong turn. So I applied at one Safeway store on 10th and Sasamat, which is up by UBC, and they weren't hiring. And then I took a wrong turn and ended up at Broadway and McDonald. And I thought, oh, here's another Safeway store. I'll just go pop in and apply. And I got hired. And it was there that I met a shop steward who was very influential to me in terms of understanding the value of a union in the workplace today. Because I was a kind of a history buff. That was where I did my major. And I understood the value as unions and labor has evolved over time. But I will admit, I was in the camp at 19 years old, working at Safeway, wondering, why am I paying union dues and why am I a part of this? But then simultaneously, I also worked as a server in a Greek restaurant. And I tell this story because it still shocks me today that this was the reality. When you broke a plate, it cost $25 out of your tips. When you broke a glass, yeah, and $10 out of your tips. You put in the wrong order and they made it, you were required to pay for it. And
wow.
The sexual harassment was rampant. And
Wow.
I was able to quit that job and just focus on Safeway because I did need the money to help support living out of my parents' house and not living at home. But I did have support that I wasn't required to stay in that environment. Not everyone else did. So then I put it in the context of, you've got shop stewards that are there so that if I dropped a jug of milk working at Safeway, I wasn't required to pay that before I left at the end of the day. It's part of doing the job. And in terms of making sure that there was benefits available for people, all that, I was really inspired. And then she had suggested I apply to work with the union in communications because I loved writing, and it was supposed to be a summer job. I was going to help through negotiations with Safeway and Save On Foods. And then I was going to go to law school. And when the time came to start law school and either accept the application or defer, I chose to defer because I wasn't really sure why I was going to law school, other than the fact that's what you do after you graduate from university. You just keep going to school and then you'll figure it out eventually. But working for UFCW and being a part of negotiations and working directly with bargaining committee members that were on the shop floor really put into perspective that what excited me, what I was passionate about, was helping people. And I could do that as a union representative and able to make change happen to improve people's workplaces. And then from there, I got hired on full time, and I've been there for almost 13 years. I became Secretary Treasurer of the union, which is one of the dual positions, back into the end of 2015. And then I became president at the beginning of last year. So I am the first woman to be president or secretary treasurer of our organization, which has been around for about 120 years, which is exciting, especially considering we have the majority of women in our membership.
I was going to say, right, if that's one of those things. So congratulations on that. But isn't that one of those things you're like, well, what took so long? Like,
Absolutely. You know, people are like, oh, are you so excited? I'm like, I'm kind of disappointed it took so long, but I'm excited. You know, and you know, you're right. Being a bit younger in this labor movement and having the opportunity to bring a different energy and to work collaboratively with people who've been with the organization for a long time, but also to be flexible, to try some new strategies and to try to, my big thing is, how are we as leadership reflected in the membership? And are we on right track? And I think it's not just identifying this one isolated issue. It's overall, are we being responsive and are we being proactive? And I think that's the thing about the labor movement that has been the most frustrating. I'm sure I'm not unique in that, but we wait for the employer to do something bad and then we act upon it, or they're constantly throwing these things at us. Like what? And I think that's what excites me about organizing, is that those are strategies where you're being proactive. How are we helping people before they even ask us for help? And then are we the right fit for them when the time comes to decide whether they want to join a union or not? And thankfully, we've seen that people are wanting to join our union.
And so I think that's huge, right? That thinking, that proactive versus reactive stuff, right? Like we have a responsibility to service current members. That's, you know, that's why they are members, and it's so important to do that. But I think part of that responsibility in servicing our members, your union members, is thinking about what are we doing to grow the union, or what are we doing to be ahead of the curve as the union? Because that wait and see approach, or the one that always gets you know, on my nerves, and heads up to everybody that I have to work with once they watch this podcast, it's the attitude of like, well, this is the way we've always done things. As soon as I hear that, I go like, okay, well, you're pretty much making the point why we should change the way we do things. And I think that's also what will attract future generations of workers to unions, is if they see unions being more proactive and, to be honest, being smarter and being, you know, quote unquote, I know I'm a moderately young person saying cooler, but being cooler than the employer, right? Like I've always been fascinated, and that's one of the reasons I got into the union movement, was when I was younger and, you know, in the 20-something, working construction at the city of Surrey, shout out to QP402, and people would talk about the good old days, and they would talk about those good old days with this pride. They were like you could feel it. And then I remember going like, well, like, why isn't it like that? And then, you know, there would be the general like, oh, because, you know, we're too management friendly, like, you know, all of the plethora of excuses that folks use. But then that got me engaged in the labor movement and working towards doing things and working with folks that are kind of ahead of the curve and trying to be progressive, right? And trying to actually get ahead of different trends. And so kudos to you folks for doing that. I think so going back to the type of workers that your folks are, and, you know, like, so you worked at a grocery store, and I actually, one of the very first jobs that I had out of high school or during high school was I worked at Budget Foods. Shout out to the Ladner Budget Foods.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So I have some experience in the grocery worker chain or work. What are things like right now at those jobs? Because I know for myself, if I go to, there's a grocery store that's close to my house, which is a Save-On. I go there, there's no lineups. I can just walk right in, right? They're making sure that people they have a clicker at the door, right? The workers are fine. Then if I go to a Safeway, it might be completely different.
Sorry, my son's
no, that's great. He can say hi to the podcast as well.
Want to say hi on the podcast? Yeah, you can say hi.
But can you give me?
Okay, I will after. Okay, sweetheart, go build your puzzle, okay?
No, sorry.
No, it's like a celebrity. It's a celebrity appearance, actually. If anybody's friends with you on Facebook, then you get to see pictures of your kids.
Yes, so there he is in the flesh. Sorry. Yeah, I cut you off though. Go ahead.
No, yeah. So I guess, so what is it like, or can you describe what it's like for folks that are working kind of on the front lines right now? And just because I know going to different grocery stores, the perspective, like the situations are different, it seems anyways, from the customer perspective. So I wonder what it's like from the worker perspective. Like, is there a difference from a union to a non-union store? Like what kind of, that kind of stuff?
Well, I think it's kind of across the board. I mean, one of the things that I've heard a lot from our members, because it's kind of shifted over time. It's been about 6 weeks now since we've had the businesses are starting to shut down. People are being required to stay home, and our members across sectors, whether it's a grocery store, the industrial plants, or healthcare, are being told, keep going to work. We need you. You're critical. You're essential. And so overnight, their jobs didn't change. The work that they do is the same today as it was 2 months ago. What has changed is suddenly it's seen as a different value because people need these services. And so the other thing that's changed are the conditions that they're working in. So I think it's gone from being overwhelmed to the fact that suddenly that there is this new value that's associated to people. We were successful in achieving premium pay in a lot of our retail grocery stores. And I think that had actually influenced other non-union retailers to do the same thing. I was talking to someone on the weekend who said that now this is being advanced at places like, Meridian Meats. And so they're non-union, but they're now paying a $2 an hour premium. Save On Foods was the first, one of the first major retailers in BC to do it. And it's been kind of across the board. And that's great. But that wasn't and continues to not be the priority of our members or for non-union workers from the people we've talked to. It's the health and safety conditions in those stores. Mm-hmm. And that has been evolving. We every day that there's a new announcement on something to be done, we're trying to push as hard as we can. We've seen the plexiglass installation. We've seen new arrows directing traffic in the stores. We've seen all these different factors. And I think the biggest piece of what our members are saying is they're scared. They're scared when they go to work. The one young worker who works at a Save On Foods told me that the health and safety of every single person in that store relies on people coming in the doors of the store. And I think it is the fact that you have to have faith that if people are sick, they're going to stay home, that they're going to reduce the number of times they're going to the grocery store. But more than anything, our members have said that the appreciation that they've been given, the thank yous, the shout outs, that's gone a long way to boosting morale. But they really, really, really are concerned for their health and safety, and that continues to evolve.
So what do we do? Because, as I hear you saying that, like my instant reaction is like, okay, like, well, what can we, the whatever you want, the royal we, what can we do?
I think, we've kind of put out a list, and this is one of the campaigns we've continued to work on as a public campaign. And we really focused on making sure that, can you please speak? Okay, I'll get 10 minutes.
Just I want you to give it now for just only 7
This is great. This is real life. Hey, this is real life.
It is real life, yeah. If you build your puzzle one more time, I'll get them for you, okay? Okay, perfect. So limiting the number of people you bring to the grocery store. First and foremost, getting back to your question, what can the public do? We know people like to shop together. It's social time for a lot of people, but limiting who you bring to the store, making sure you're getting in and out with a list of things. This is not time to browse. Leaving home your reusable bags. That's a big one of our members. Not only does it bring in the contaminants from the bags into the stores, but then there's that close proximity of bagging groceries closer to the cashiers, and keeping your space. I think one of the things that has really hurt our members the most in terms of the emotional weight, all of this, and the mental impacts of all of it, and the stress and the anxiety, is when customers say, why are you freaking out? Why, come on, relax. And the reality is they are in these stores day after day, hearing these reports of more cases of COVID, knowing that people come to the grocery store or the pharmacy, regardless of whether or not they maybe be sick or not, because they need to eat and they need to get their medication. And so, encouraging people to use delivery service or rely on friends and family if you're not feeling well is a huge factor as well. And I think more than anything for what we have heard when there's a public call is limit the number of times per week you're going to the grocery store too, so that you've got less crowding happening, because that's really the hardest part, is when you've got these big lineups and big crowds in stores. We've seen the numbers now be reduced, but try and plan your day or your week so that you're shopping once every week, or maybe every 2 weeks if you can do it.
Yeah, I think that's great and great advice. And I always worry because I know as people must be getting more and more frustrated, financially, and then also coming into different stores with a whole new kind of reality of how you're supposed to shop. I would hate to see that frustration being taken out on the workers, right? Which I think it's very easy for people to do because they're frustrated for a million other reasons, and then all of a sudden they're being asked to change the way, you know, they shop for groceries, right? So I think to everybody, you know, being respectful and being mindful of, you know, the folks that are working, especially at grocery stores. I mean, they're literally there all day.
Yeah.
And with they have no control over who's walking into that store. And that is just, as I say that, it kind of takes the breath away, my breath away.
It does. And, you know, you've raised a really good point, because we are unfortunately seeing cases where customers have become impatient and they're saying inappropriate things. You know, the reality is this is not new for members in our industry. When you are shopping in a grocery store after a long day at work and you're frustrated, and suddenly you went in to go get something and now you have to wait in line, or they don't have the product that you want, that has been taken out on our members for years, because they're the front line. They are the face of the company. And so because they're not getting a rain check or whatever it might be, it has impacted them. And now COVID is the frustration people have. I want that product. I think you have it in the back, even though you don't. I think that's really when we talk about what does life look like after COVID, when we go back to normal, so to speak. Our members have been dealing with this before. And so while there's a lot of appreciation and recognition to be kind and be patient, please don't stop being kind and patient when COVID is over, because it's still not their fault.
It sounds like something we shouldn't have to ask.
Right.
You know? But you're right, though, because how, like, it becomes the union's responsibility to make sure that that type of workplace becomes cemented in the collective agreement.
Exactly.
Right? Like that's
Absolutely.
the responsibility. Like, yeah, we're all going to act as if now, because we've got this kind of feeling of, you know, unity. We're galvanized, right, as communities and as a society. But really, like, these are just the common things that create a healthy workplace that we shouldn't be kind of, it really is that feeling. It's kind of like you being the first woman president. It's like, yes, that's great, but like, do we really have to be asking this of people?
Exactly. So I think that when we take away from this and when we look at what the future has, because we've been asked this question a lot, it's trying to capture these moments in time that people are feeling this sort of recognition for this work that hasn't changed. The circumstances around them have, but the work itself hasn't. Let's not stop valuing that across the board when this is over, whether you work in a grocery store, in a food processing plant, in healthcare, or any other frontline service across the province and the country.
And something, because I don't want to take very much more time out of Zach's afternoon, but we should talk about transit. We're hearing rumblings, or I have heard that I haven't actually seen anything official. I'm sure you can let me know what is official, but we're hearing layoffs coming out of transit, and obviously your members will be affected by this. Can you talk about this a little bit, as much as you can?
Yeah, definitely. And they absolutely will be. I mean, with the services, as I've read today, being cut down so dramatically with the SkyTrain and with bus service, it is going to have a huge impact on our membership, because not only is this a reliable way for many of our workers and our members to get to work today, for those people who often carpooled, suddenly that's not something that can be done anymore. And so their next line of being able to have consistency in getting to work was through transit. So now, you know, you've taken away the carpooling method, which is important for health and safety purposes, but now you also don't have the transit method. How else are people going to get to work? And then even with these long delays, members right now are working really hard through some pretty serious conditions, and in many cases are canceling their vacations to be available to work because there is a high demand. And now their days are going to get stretched out even longer when their bus routes are canceled, or suddenly large gaps of time are. So now you've got your 8-hour shift, plus it's going to take you an hour longer potentially on the way to work and an hour longer on the way home. That's even more time away from home and resting and trying to, you know, recoup after a day of being on the front lines. And so we see this as a massive impact to our membership.
Yeah, I think we're going to see it across. And, you know, I know you've got some members in social services as well, right? That would work potentially with elderly folks, right? Like this is how people get around, right? And it's the ironic part of this, it's generally the population that uses transit, and in a lot of cases is the population that doesn't have access to a vehicle, that actually needs transit. That is their mode of transportation. That is their livelihood. And so, yeah, I know we're trying to book some of the union leadership out of the unions that represent those workers, because I think it's important to hear from them. But I think it's important also for us to kind of contextualize that this affects all of us, right?
Yeah, what's the real impact of these things? Because absolutely for those workers who are working in transit and the impact on them. And I mean, our call is to all levels of government, to the federal government, to subsidize what needs to be subsidized, so that these essential workers who rely on this method of getting to work to be on the front lines don't have that taken away from them. And, the reality is our membership, and you kind of touched on this, as retail workers, are oftentimes very low paid workers. And so we work really, really hard to negotiate more. And, we've got these benefit plans in place and a lot of our collective agreements that mean that people have access to health and dental benefits at 6 months, but the subsidy on transit is a huge, huge component. And so to be able to afford a car and insurance and everything else on top of now this moment of crisis is going to be a big challenge. And so I urge all of the government, keep these people able to get to work, and let's make a way to make transit available for people. It's very important.
Yes, very, very important. Look, I don't want to take up any more of your time today, although please, open invitation. I would absolutely love to have you back on. I mean, I'll say post-COVID, but even if it has to be during this whole thing, I'd love to stay in constant contact with you. Your union's doing great work, and you're doing some really awesome work, and we appreciate all of the work that not just you're doing, but obviously that your members are doing. So from the Labor Knots family, thank you for coming on, and a big, big thank you for all the work that you folks are doing. If folks want to stay connected to UFCW, and definitely for people and any non-union workers that are looking for an awesome union to join, or information about getting unionized, how do folks learn more about you or about UFCW?
Best way to get more details information is our website, which is ufcw1518.com, or to follow us on Facebook, UFCW1518, or you can follow me on Facebook, just Kim Novak.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And please thank your little one for being so patient.
I will. Yeah,
I'm sorry, buddy. If you can hear me, I'm sorry, buddy. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
It's really good to see you. Thank you so much for the invite.
Thank you again.
Awesome.